Hello, everyone. Welcome back for some more of our reading of Fate Strange Fake. We're on a chapter simply called Extra, Observer or Character Creation, which is very interesting. Now, from what I'm aware, this was sort of written as like a prologue for a potential video game, but instead it got turned into a light novel, so let's see what the heck is up with this, right? I do need to zoom in, I'm just realizing. Let's get a little bit closer, just a little bit closer. There we go. All right. Let's see what's up. So, I need to get even closer. That's tiny text. All right, that's too big. It's too big. It's too big. That's too small. I hate the fact that it, like, jumps. Why does it jump? Why does it jump? Okay. Okay. So, it's... reading this idea of character creation is giving me feelings of Fate Extra. We'll have to see. We'll have to see anyways. So, Observer, or Character Creation. The space was a completed world, jet black with points of light. In the center of the room, in the wide, perfect sphere dyed in the color of the night sky, there floated a wooden chair. This chair. No. No, it's not gonna be... Or is it? Based on its appearance alone, it would be enough to call the chair extravagant, but its wood gave it a refined hue, and one would not think it a repulsive god of the elite. Rather, just by existing here, it imbued the space around it with a conspicuous gravity. If an unrefined person sat in the chair, the person would likely be consumed by the weight of the chair's existence and hidden from the surrounding view. Such was the significance of this chair. The space had been prepared for the sole purpose of exhibiting the chair. A man exuding a solemnity that outweighed that of the chair leaned back in it, emitting a loud creak. If one were to draw a reduced map of the universe based on this room, the man sitting in the chair would be at its center, emitting an air surely befitting of its master. His external appearance would probably place his age in the 50s or 60s. One could sense the trials of his life in the wrinkles etched deeply on his face, but his eyes remained brimming with brilliance, such as one might see in someone 10 years his junior. The axis is wrong. These lines will be annihilated too. When the man slipped his finger into the sky, the heavenly bodies displayed on the surrounding walls began to revolve. Oh, this cutoff isn't so... No, it's the worst. That damned giant spider will wake up. It's a century too early to face that. Once again, we hear about the spider. Then, as if to match his words, the pages in the book hovering in front of the man turned with a flicker, inscribing multifarious information in real time. The thickness of the book was about that of a standard encyclopedia. Regardless, as the man guided his finger through the air, thousands, tens of thousands of pages were born and erased. After continuing this activity again and again, the old man muttered as if in boredom. As I thought, no matter how this is resolved, it doesn't result in a satisfactory outcome for the association. Having said that, there isn't enough reason for my interventions. Yes, it's a complete stalemate. The man who seemed to be talking to himself suddenly asked the space behind him for an opinion. What do you think? It's about time you said hello. The communication device there is working fine. At that, the space replied. How rude of me, it seems you've noticed. There was a small wooden table of similar design to the chair. Atop it sat a telephone. It had the shape of a very old telephone, the kind that looked like a table lamp at first glance, but instead of a light bulb, there was a conical speaker. Mounted on a thin post was a microphone. A dial was affixed to the base of the device. It was like a telephone you would only find in movies, museums, or antique shops, save for one difference. Unlike the black color of most antique telephones, this one was a beautiful blue color that evoked sapphire. At a glance, one could only think that it had been crafted from an enormous precious gem. Is this... We're talking gems and an old man. There is someone who this could be. As for how long the question of how long the telephone had been there shouldn't have been anything in that space until several minutes prior. But the telephone was wonderfully integrated with the harmony of the room, as if it had always existed there. Indeed, addressing the phone had confirmed the fact of its existence, as if the history of the room had been rewritten. With a little more time, I had planned to make the phone's bell ring. A youthful-sounding voice resounded from the telephone speaker. It seemed as if the phone was speaking according to its own will. Huh. Do I strike you as an old man who talks to himself? Did you ask me that because you knew it was me? Hold the phone. This isn't Zelrich using Kaleido magic to talk to other versions of himself, is he? Oh my god, if that's the case. Let's see. Did you ask me because you knew it was me? What do you think we are? I can count the number of people who can get inside. Rolling his shoulders, the old man glanced at the blue telephone. So, wait a sec. A telephone that lets you talk across dimensions? That's from Hollow Ataraxia! Oh my god, except that was a cute little cell phone version. Oh my god, hold up. Okay. Okay. We'll see. I might be jumping the gun, but okay. So what business do you have here? If you want to have tea, come back later. Unfortunately, I'm wrapped up in some troublesome work. Yeah, I'm actually here because of that. What? If you're going to choose someone to observe the incident at Snowfield, don't pick from the Magi. You should select a world on the basis of being an intruder. You should select a world of... Whoa. With that, the telephone's dial slowly began to turn, returning to its starting point at certain intervals before turning again. At the same time, the heavenly bodies revolving around the room and the book the old man was reading began turning faster than they had before. Inscribed on the pages was the face of a human, and that person's information. At times it was male, at times it was female. At times it was elderly, at times it was a child. At times it was muscle-bound, at times it was obese, at times it was a saint, at times it was a vicious murderer. At times it was a magus, at times it was a priest. Flipping between the countless qualities such as race, gender, age, body type, clothing, personality, occupation, the page's books turned with incredible momentum. You're quite confident in the turning of the planets. The trajectory to the future is like a labyrinth. It's my specialty. Someone passing by the two at this moment would have likely found it a bizarre conversation. Of course, unlike my labyrinth... Who would have a labyrinth? It's my specialty. I haven't read Fate Labyrinth. I wonder if that's going to be an important thing that I should have read first. Damn it. I don't know. I don't know where that takes place. I know that's like a one-off, right? Not just a one-off thing. Maybe I'll read that in the future. We'll see. The pages kept turning at high speed, and the displayed faces smoothly blended into each other. As if watching a scene from times past, the old man sat back and watched as the telephone continued to turn its own dial. Then, after some time, the turning of the pages slowed. Inscribed on one page was an Eastern person. Next is to, yes, she needs some glasses. The page turned delicately. A thin-framed pair of glasses appeared on the person's face. Is that important? Who knows? I'm just back calculating from the result I arrived at. Whether or not it has any meaning at all is something we can consider later. As he looked at the information on the final page, the old man spoke to the telephone behind him. Still, you've certainly involved yourself with the world. If you're that bored, you just visit the town yourself. Shouldn't there be a cafe that caters to readers? You can kill plenty of time there. No, this isn't exactly killing time. I'm rather involved with the incident this time. I see. That's something that one has thought of. Or it's something that one has thought of. The old man immediately understood the meaning behind the telephone's words and recalled someone's face, took a deep sigh, and then his lips twisted into a smile. So, you have a bit of a plan, all the more reason you can't intervene. It's that sort of fool that rejoices as more intruders are involved. Let the Holy Grail War this time be followed through by an outsider. Yeah, you're right. If you handled this poorly, it would confirm the world. Huh. It was certainly a bizarre conversation that only could happen between these two. Then the person behind the telephone, or perhaps the telephone itself, looked at the person now described in the book and spoke in a cheerful voice. Her universe is a pseudopigraphon. That's not a word. That's not a word. Am I gonna have to look this up? What the frick is this word? What? Pseudopigraphon. You're just making up words. Oh, no, it's not. Pseudopigrapha are falsely attributed works, texts whose claimed author is not the true author. Biblical studies. Jewish writings ascribed to various biblical patriarchs but comprised of stuff... Okay. Oh my god, wait. It's another type of apocrypha. Shut the front door. That's wild. Well, it's a good thing they didn't call this fate pseudopigraphon. Okay. Let's hope for the best and watch over her. The book opened to a picture of a young girl. It was apparently an Eastern girl in her late teens to early 20s with dyed blonde hair. Below her portrait was the name with the letter beginning with the letter A. And then with her as the center, here and now, the curtain would rise on a Holy Grail war smeared with falsehood and vanity. Now it's time to spur on the fakes. So... they keep talking about fake. I wonder what that means. Because some of these servants, I'm like, well, I know you're not fake. I know Gil isn't fake, right? Unless he is. We don't know much about him, actually, so we'll have to see. Okay. Okay. Whoa, hey. I think this is just the art again, right? Just the... No, this is new art, actually. Okay, we got a very flat-headed looking Gil. We got his master. We got the weird caster there. We got, zoom in a bit here. I can't actually get closer. I can't actually show you. Okay, let's see. Okay, there we go. There we go. Too small. Too small. Okay. Some interesting characters. Come, it's time to exterminate the fake. Okay. Interesting. Chapter 1. The war begins. Okay. Too big. There we go. Chapter 1. The war begins. What sort of being was Gilgamesh? Tine Shelk, I gotta get used to her name. Information on him prior to his summoning was cursory at best. However, with just that sliver of knowledge, she was determined to stake her destiny and the obsession she inherited from her ancestors on this heroic spirit. Gilgamesh, king of heroes. Eons ago, in what was later called Mesopotamia, there reigned a great king who would become the hero of the land. During the early days of an age in which the gods still lived and people had greater power as individuals than they do now, this hero, born of a union between man and god, ruled over the fortress city Uruk. He was known as both a despot who destroyed his country and a king who stood on the precipice of history and brought the land into a new age. Regardless of what end he met, the fact that remained that Uruk flourished as a nation of magnificent splendor under the rule of Gilgamesh. His vault was said to contain all the works of gods and men. It was later rumored that they were the original versions of all the noble phantasms used by heroes of later ages. In the past, this heroic spirit, who possessed great divinity, was apparently summoned in the Holy Grail Wars of a land known as Japan. It was said that Gilgamesh's power surpassed that of many other heroes, and that he had emerged as the victor. From what Tine had heard, he was a man of many skills and was competent in all areas, but more importantly, his combat style was so overwhelming that it gave everyone else pause. The stories about raising the fortress city and collecting countless treasures out of greed had caught her attention. Once Tine committed herself into this Holy Grail War, she was prepared to cast aside her integrity. Her side needed transcendent power in order to take back their land from the infringement of the greedy. In other words, she needed to be greedier than the usurpers. That was how Tine had been raised. So she knew she had to be ruthless. If Gilgamesh was a tyrant who would trample on an enemy already laid low just to eliminate them, so be it. It didn't matter how much she tainted her honor. Her people would chase the violators out of their land and cleanse it in its entirety. To fulfill the duties she inherited from her ancestors, Tine intended to abandon her girlish heart and offer her entire self to the powerful despot. She wasn't afraid of death. What Tine truly feared was none other than the continued rape of her ancestral homeland at the hands of the Magi outsiders. However, she had miscalculated. She wasn't wrong about Gilgamesh's quality as a hero. Tine, who lived in the modern age, simply did not understand the true significance of a hero who had been alive in an age where gods freely mixed with the humans. It didn't matter whether he was a tyrannical or benevolent king. She had utterly underestimated the magnitude of his power. Tine had no inkling of the overwhelming might that the golden-armored heroic spirit was said to have displayed during previous Holy Grail wars. Foolish to the heroic spirit Gilgamesh, these conflicts were dull affairs mired in the conceit and foolishness, save for a brief moment. So, what sort of being was Gilgamesh? Right after Tine swore her loyalty to him, she glimpsed a hint of the truth. He was a man with the royal disposition of a king and the heroic soul of a champion. When the garment that the King of Heroes had graced her with was worn away, she saw a torrent of pure power. Night. Northern snowfield. Wide valley. You are but a child, so act like one. While you are still ignorant in the ways of the world, simply rejoice in the brilliance of my kingship. I shall endeavor to do so. When Tine lowered her head at Gilgamesh's words, it happened. An enormous flow of mystic energy blanketed the surrounding space and converged at a point beside Tine. It was more than just energy. The purest magic element she had ever seen in her life. No, it had even a divine aura to it, coalesced in the King of Heroes' right hand and materialized in the form of a dagger. But the object had too bizarre a silhouette to be simply a dagger. It looked very similar to Gilgamesh's summoning catalyst used by the Magus that Tine had eliminated earlier. A key sword? Tine murmured without thinking. Gilgamesh haughtily replied, "Do not speak of this in the same terms as the key in the hands of that clown." Grasping the key sword, Gilgamesh turned its tip skyward. "This is something like a contract I bound myself, given form." His tone seemed bored, should have read that first, but his expression contained a hint of joy. "Pay attention, Tine, and show me your proof." Before Tine, whose head was bowed, it opened. The energy flowing from the key sword surged into all of the space around it and opened a portal in the world itself. Tine's black-clad allies were sent into a clamor, but the voices of the crowd, which amounted to hundreds of people, were silenced by the trembling of space. The dimensions themselves seemed to be shaking, and only Gilgamesh's voice clearly reached Tine's ears. "Know this! My subjects would never be shocked by a mere children's game." While he spoke, the distortion in space converged on a single point. A single sword emerged from the distortion in front of Gilgamesh. It was nothing like the earlier key sword, but it was certainly no normal weapon. The sword had a strangely shaped blade. As if enjoying himself, Gilgamesh spoke directly to the sword. "O Ea, it may be unpleasant to wake you from your slumber, but I shall soon provide you with a feast." An instant later, the King of Heroes moved. "No, you won't be bored. No one will." He was graceful in every gesture and arrogant in all respects. Then, taking a stride filled with unconcealable jubilation, Gilgamesh's figure suddenly vanished from sight. With a single step, he had gone somewhere else. That was all he did, but even to Tine, who was learned in magic, Gilgamesh's gesture was imbued with an overwhelming fire she had never experienced before, and perhaps might never again. Leaving a master's side was an unthinkable act for a servant to commit. The workings of the Holy Grail War were engraved in the brains of all servants at the time of their summoning. Gilgamesh couldn't have been unaware of the risks of leaving his master alone. Yet, Tine, stunned by the heat of the moment, could find no fault with his actions. She had to burn everything that happened from now on into her memory. This was a premonition Tine felt as she was flooded with Gilgamesh's power. The feeling that welled up in the heart of the young girl, who was supposed to have abandoned all emotion, was a fear of the unknown. Or perhaps... Seconds earlier, western snowfield, large forest. Master, I'd like you to wait here, just for a while. Enkidu brushed the cheek of the silver wolf, who looked at him with anxious eyes. Then he knelt on one knee before his master, softly splayed his fingers in the earth. It will be all right. As Enkidu smiled, the surrounding trees began to rustle. The forest will protect you. They were suddenly concealed from the sky by a frantic movement of branches and leaves, and a powerful mystic energy began to flow into the earth. It was as if the forest had a will completely its own, and deliberately formed a natural magical barrier. I have to go. If I can meet him here, the forest would be killed, and I'd have no way to protect you. Can you forgive me? Enkidu hugged the silver wolf as it gave a feeble howl. Oh. Thank you, Master. As long as life beats within this breast of mine, I swear to return to you. At the same time that Gilgamesh had disappeared from the company of Tine and her allies, Enkidu also made a single stride on the earth. He was as modest as the wind and as pious as a spring. Having said that, the joy expressed in Enkidu's powerful footsteps was no less than that of the King of Heroes. This is bad. Let's leave the forest. Faldius, sensing an anomaly, ordered his men to retreat over the radio. What's going on? The flow of mana has changed. It's likely that the woods are now under its control. As he said this, Faldius felt an enormous power streaming through the forest, silently, without harming the woods, as if it was gliding upon the earth. One could even call it the wind. In awe of the presence of this heroic spirit that had become one with the force, Faldius confirmed its bearing, then issued orders to his subordinates. As you withdraw, stay as far away from the desert as possible. We'll deploy UAVs and familiars in that area. Then, in the skies high above Snowfield, a great force seemed to disrupt the atmosphere, and something of equally monumental power passed through them. Faldius felt this flow of power several seconds after he issued the order to retreat. Could it be? Was something happening there? After calculating all the possibilities, Faldius came to a solution and rejected it. Or rather, he hoped that it wasn't true. We haven't even begun to grasp their power. Do they intend to start already? In the city, a cheap motel. In a cheap motel that was old even by Midtown standards, Flat woke up, though he'd been sleeping soundly just a moment ago. The motel was situated along a highway a short distance from the center of town. As the young man rubbed his eyes and nose, his servant Jack spoke. What's wrong, master? You having trouble sleeping? Need to use the toilet, just say so. I'll turn to spirit form and wait here. I just noticed, but being spoken to like this right after I wake up reminds me of those cartoon character alarm clocks. Flat was speaking to his left wrist. On that wrist was a steampunk-style antique wristwatch, and Jack's voice came from it. Normally I would already be in spirit form, but you're the one who said, oh, it'd be awesome if I looked like a spy, so, well, here we are. Jack was currently Flat's personal wristwatch. After leaving the park, Flat decided to test Jack's power of transforming into anything, making him turn into everything from people to plants and animals, and then eventually inanimate objects. Shut the front door, my man became Prop Hunt. This is a Prop Hunt servant, holy crap. That's amazing. At first he thought, well, there's no way Jack the Ripper's true identity was an inanimate object, but according to Jack, there were apparently many romance novels in which Jack the Ripper was actually a person possessed by a cursed item, and then he had shown Flat how he could transform into a surprising variety of objects. After testing out a wristwatch transformation, Flat took a liking to its design, and the topic had turned to planning for his personal safety by wearing it a while. He always wore the watch except when he was showering or on the toilet, and the two initially communicated via telepathy until Flat uttered something very unlike a magus. This is kinda tiring, it's more fun to talk normally. And so they spoke out loud when no one was watching. Flat got off the bed and checked Jack's time against that of the motel's clock. That's amazing. There's no difference at all. Well, let it be said that punctuality is a quality of the English gentleman. At least that would be true if I actually were a gentleman. So even gentlemen can be serial killers, huh? After unmindfully trampling on Jack's feelings, Flat went to the bathroom, stoppered the sink, and began filling it with water. What are you doing? Flat wet his fingers while answering the heroic wristwatch question. Don't you feel anything? While Jack choked on his words, the young master placed his finger on the bathroom mirror and started drawing a simple magical circle. Two conspicuous sources of magical noise heading southward. At that, Jack spoke in a somewhat embarrassed tone. I'm not proud of it, but basically, my abilities as a magus are poor. They would increase if I were to take the form of a mage, but attempting to sense abnormalities of manimal in this form is an impossible task. Oh, so if you turn into a radar dish, your sensing powers might go up. Are you actually a magus from the clock tower? Ignoring Jack's doubts, Flat casually kept moving his finger until he completed the magic circle. Then he spoke some incantation in the mirror, and the water in the sink changed. There were a series of ripples on the water's surface, then it displayed some kind of vision. Seeing an image of a desert in the water, the wristwatch's hands ticked. What is this? Some people are using familiars to monitor the desert, so I'm just taking a little peek, Flat replied nonchalantly. What? Well, if I send a familiar out now, it wouldn't make it in time, Flat explained offhand. Although Jack wasn't a specialist in magic, he had some essential knowledge transmitted from the Holy Grail system. From that knowledge, Jack understood that taking a peek at someone else's familiar was no trivial feat. It would make sense if Flat was a neophyte in magic, but coming to a Holy Grail war as a tourist, or transferring in spells of a Master Magus that were actually fighting in the war, was something no sane person would do. And if it were that easy, would it not mean the collapse of the entire system that ran on familiars? As doubts swirled in his head, Jack spoke. Can you really do something like that? No, I mean, even if it were possible, isn't it risky? If they did trace our position, couldn't we be compromised? I did it in a way that we wouldn't be found out, though I can't say for sure we won't be detected. The professor wouldn't be able to, but he'd probably have a hunch and hunt me down later. Oh, but if someone of Luvia-chan's level might just cause an energy backflow and blow up this entire motel. Murmuring some rather unsettling things, the young man refocused and kept talking. Well, if they do find us out, I'll just apologize as hard as I can. An icy wind buffeted Jack's heart, and he muttered to himself as Flat laughed innocently. It wasn't completely inaccurate, but it was still a sentence that, just a bit, described the essence of his master. I'm terrified you'll still be saying such things after you've killed someone. Snowfield, southern Snowfield, desert region. There was an expansive desert to the south of the city. It wasn't as large as the deserts of Colorado or Arizona, but it continued as far as the eye could see from the city, and someone who wandered in carelessly could easily be stranded. In the middle of this desert, they faced each other. From here, the forest and the city were no longer visible. There was nothing but sandy ground, save for some sparse desert-adapted flora. The heroic spirit of the spear, Enkidu, had arrived earlier, and was quietly gazing at the night sky. There, a golden figure hovered in the air as if to smother the countless twinkling stars. The heroic spirit of the bow was clad in golden armor, and he gripped something in his hand. Enkidu knew exactly what was in the man's hand. He also knew that the man was floating thanks to the power of a special noble phantasm. And of course, he knew who this man was. Heaven and Earth. The distance between the two was roughly 120 meters. The heroic spirits met each other's eyes. One set of eyes looked down upon the ground while the other stared into the night sky, but each gaze was neither condescending nor reverent to the other. Once they had identified each other, they exchanged no words. But an instant later, both of their lips curled up at exactly the same time, and they laughed. They laughed as if to express that everything was now enough. Meanwhile, somewhere in urban Snowfield, a rooftop. The nameless assassin stood on the rooftop of the tallest building of a section of the city, the Casino Hotel Crystal Hill. She was there to get a lay of the land and to feel out the presence of those involved with the Holy Grail War. It was a conspicuous move, but if someone came to target her, that would just speed things up. She was perched on the rooftop in a tactlessly straightforward tactic, observing the city, until something caught her attention. It was the south of the city. There was only desert on the horizon. But the zealot did not avert her eyes, intently scowling at the valley between heaven and earth. Oh, has the party begun? Observing assassin from the rooftop of a different building. Oh no, that's Jester. The blood-sucking Magus Jester also sensed the anomaly. His powers of perception were not especially strong. Nonetheless, a tingle ran up his spine as he sensed the presence of something. Perhaps it was the instinct of someone who had lived so long on the margin between life and death. Right now, somewhere in that desert, something was happening. Noting this premonition of a sense other than a magical perception, he smiled a dastardly grin and sneered. This war will be our wetting isle. Do try to show us some fireworks. Snowfield, desert region. After taking the time to exchange a smile, Gilgamesh moved. The strange sword in his hand, the Sword of Rupture Ea, activated, and it unleashed its true form as a noble phantasm. Noble phantasms. They were possessed by heroic spirits and made up a part of their concept as heroes. Some were weapons wielded by heroes throughout their lives. Some were parts of a hero's body. Some could be considered the soul of the hero itself, a spatial artifact that painted over reality. Noble phantasms came in countless forms, and they varied from hero to hero. To Gilgamesh, who had obtained every treasure there was, mediocre noble phantasms were mere trinkets to be tossed into his vault. But this sword was one of the few exceptions that was especially prized among the noble phantasms that Gilgamesh owned. Yet, the sword bore no inscription. Though it was called Ea, this was merely a nickname of convenience he had given it. In fact, it might not even be a sword at all. After all, this was something that existed long before swords and spears had appeared in history. It hailed from an era more ancient than humans, older than the planet itself. It was a relic, a rarity among rarities, a pure manifestation of the power wielded by gods to enact Genesis. It was the beginning of all on this planet. It was that which clove apart heaven and earth. It rent the void and created the sky, and then pierced the sky and returned it to the void. This power symbolized the beginning and the end, and only Gilgamesh, who inherited the essence of the gods, was permitted to wield it. Therefore, when Gilgamesh swung the sword with all his might, it was defined as an anti-world noble phantasm. Offensive noble phantasms can be classified into tiers such as anti-personnel, anti-army, anti-fortress, and so on. In many cases, anti-personnel noble phantasms were more appropriate for a one-on-one battle between heroic spirits and anti-army or anti-fortress noble phantasms. But when it came to the sheer power of an anti-world noble phantasms, considerations such as compatibility and applicability went out the window. It was absolute power. The power to destroy the world itself. Regardless of whether the opponent was an individual or a group, it simply broke down the world they existed in. Such was an attack which Gilgamesh unleashed with all his strength. Against a single heroic spirit, Gilgamesh attacked without hesitation. There was neither play nor negligence. The king of heroes discarded his usual arrogance and put everything he had into a single attack. On the ground stood the heroic spirit Enkidu. This attack was a message to his oldest only friend. It was a song of pure joy for their reunion, conveying everything he felt as a king, as a hero, as the man Gilgamesh. O Ea, sing to thy heart's content. Gilgamesh spoke these words not to the heroic spirit below him, but to the sword in his hand. As if in response, the cylindrical sword twisted the air while spinning like a tunneling drill. The whirlwind grew and drew in more air, and a small tornado formed. The two cyclones combined and created an even greater distortion in the air. All of this was drawn and compressed in the sword. The layers of wind grew even denser and exceeded the physical laws, quickly turning into a lethal weapon that ripped apart all of creation, and even began condensing into a fissure in space itself. Sound and light converged in the distortion, and silence and darkness encircled the sword. As if to excite the howls of the seemingly living weapon, Gilgamesh gripped it with even more strongly, and swung it down at his long-lost friend without hesitation. Enuma Elish! Star of Genesis, separate heaven and earth. The distortion ruptured. The entire universe that had been compressed beyond limit focused around Ea and was unleashed by its wielder's slash. The resulting pressure wave sundered the nearby space. The world itself was sucked up by the chasm of the void and turned inside out. Who would believe that this scene was caused by the swing of a sword? The void emerged from the chasm, rupturing space further. The world eroded, giving way to countless fissures in reality. The sands were cracked like clay. The sky and clouds were shredded like so much paper. It was a hellish landscape, as if a painting of the desert had been thrown into a blender. The slash of the sword twisted and tore the planet, sending a wave of destruction at the heroic spirits standing on the ground. Then, Enkidu. No, don't go away. All right, sure. Police station. Chief of Police Orlando Reeve, acolyte magus that he was, sensed the swirling auras south of the city. Even within town, we are detecting countless minute energy sources. It is likely that the Magi who infiltrated Snowfield had deployed familiars to the desert. Orlando was quiet for a few seconds after hearing his aide's report. Oh, that was the aide. The police chief silently looked out the window. Earlier, he received news that the 6 servants had gathered. However, he hadn't predicted that the situation would accelerate this quickly. He suspected it to be a plot of Faldius and that meddling old fool, but there was no point in investigating it now. Far away, there was a power so terrible to make him tremble. Even if the clash was happening tens of kilometers away, it could no longer be ignored as someone else's problem. It was a wave of power, just enough to cause slight discomfort, but every hair on Orlando's body stood on end. What he felt now was very similar to witnessing an F5 tornado looming down on his hometown as a child. Fighting down turbulent, gut-wrenching emotions, Orlando calmly commanded his subordinate, "Call the entire field team. I'm going to brief them." But there was probably no need to assemble them here. Until several minutes ago, he had actually been thinking that individual comms would have been enough. But after feeling the massive flow of mana, he reconsidered. It was time for a slight change of plans. It was no longer possible to think of this Holy Grail War as a war between Magi. Now, there was all the more reason to speak to the field team face to face. He had to tell them that the flag of justice was already flying behind them as they stepped into this foreign battlefield. Orlando wasn't so naive as to think that this war could be won with complacence. In a truly pressing battle, that mindset could be the difference between life and death. It was all or nothing. The chief felt space warp itself in the desert and reconfirmed his conviction. Justice. They had to trust that the power of that word would protect them. The enemy was just that formidable. Desert region. The blow that declared the start of the false Holy Grail War could well have been the final attack that ended a Holy Grail War. Many heroic spirits would not even warrant the use of Ea. Most heroic spirits whom the king deemed worthy to wield his sword against would be simply awed at its power, yet challenge the king anyway. Heroes that witnessed the power of Genesis would feel a variety of emotions. Resignation, determination, terror, fear, horror, hatred, or perhaps joy. But there was one heroic spirit who would smile with nostalgia in the face of hell on earth, the amalgamation of death and the void. Ah, yes. While a vast power trampled heaven and earth and smashed the world on its path toward him, Enkidu smiled with an expression of deep relief. It was an attack devoid of deceit or subterfuge. Though it lacked the sheer magnitude it had during the Age of Gods, the nature of his power was exactly as it had been then. I'm happy, Gil. So happy that I can test my powers against yours like this again. There was no one more human than him, though he hated humans. No one more divine, though he denied the gods. The king of heroes, who stood upon the apex of creation, was fighting him seriously as an opponent. In that case, Enkidu could only respond in kind. As he thought this, the heroic spirit turned with a gentle motion. Adjusted for this era, I think it'd be something like this. The void shattered the earth as it made its way toward him. The heroic spirit smiled and smiled and smiled. I'll fight with everything I have too, Gil. Then the world went into flux. Northern Snowfield, Wide Valley. What on earth? Tine Shelk was confused. She had sent her condor familiar after the heroic spirit, but it couldn't keep up at all. But she knew immediately that something was happening based on the earth tremors coming from the south. Before Gilgamesh departed, he had said this battle had become worthy of my true might. In other words, the source of the earth-shaking howling was probably her servant who had gone off to fight seriously. An enormous quantity of odd, her body's internal mystic energy was flowing away. The power supply to a contracted servant was provided by the Holy Grail established in this land and the Master's own energy. While she was on this land, Tine could draw upon the mana gushing from its ley lines and convert it to odd as she pleased, but now she felt as if her body would be sucked dry if she lost her focus. Tine's magic circuits jarred as she converted energy at a shocking rate. Still, the girl let no discomfort show on her face and bore the burden. She would show no weakness in front of her comrades who placed their faith in her. Besides, if she faltered at a trifle such as this, she would be unworthy to be a subject of the king, as Gilgamesh had said. As these thoughts went through her head, Tine embraced a single conviction. There was a noble phantasm that destroyed the world itself. Gilgamesh had shut off the shared perception and telepathy that linked them as master and familiar, so Tine didn't know what was actually happening at the battlefield, but this energy flow told her enough. Tine was convinced that no servant could clash with this much power and hope to survive. Should she rejoice in the removal of a chess piece so early in the game, or should she lament tipping their hand to the other masters' camps? As the girl doubted herself, something happened that bewildered her even further. Because Tine had a unique brand of magic that shared energy with the earth, she felt it even at this distance. Impossible. Enough power was flowing to the desert to oppose Gilgamesh, and it wasn't from the ley lines. It was as if the planet itself had come to the location and funneled a gigantic amount of mana into it. It was enough to delude one into thinking that Gaia, the counterforce of the planet, was opposing Gilgamesh's power to destroy the world. Then she understood. Right now, the heroic spirit fighting Gilgamesh in the southern desert was at least as powerful as he was. It was a being outside the rules of the game. Desert region. Enkidu's manifestation of a lancer was probably due to his noble phantasm. However, it was not quite accurate to call it a noble phantasm. It was a chisel to tie the bond between men and gods. That was Enkidu's true nature. According to one tale, in an attempt to cling to their power, the gods had placed Gilgamesh upon the earth as a chisel to ensure that humans would continue to worship the gods as gods. However, he did not fulfill that duty, instead reigning in such a way as to personally drive humanity away from the gods. Perhaps the King of Heroes had forgotten his charge, or perhaps he simply ignored it. A spear was made to question, investigate, and discipline the King of Heroes, who had failed in this duty. Namely, Enkidu was born as the concept of a god-forged weapon to pierce Gilgamesh's hostility and return the chisel to the god's own hands. Thus, the likelihood was high that he was chosen by the Holy Grail for the Lancer class. It could also be said that his noble phantasm, an attack which used his own body as a weapon, was best personified by a Lancer. He would simply puncture the world and stitch it back together. If a wall existed in the chasm between heaven and earth, he existed to pierce that concept. But the gods miscalculated again, as they did with Gilgamesh's hostility. The weapon gained knowledge of its own after descending to the earth and interacting with humans. It then tried to bridge the world of gods and men in its own way. The chisel would indeed be returned to the gods, in other words, by approaching the gods. That is, gods would not rule humanity, and humanity would make its way to the realm of gods. Thus, Enkidu chose to become a system. He chose to be a weapon wielded by the King of the Earth, a pathway that would be fully expended for the evolution of the world. And he made a decision as a human. He would be someone that rid the king of his solitude and would always be by his side. In the instant that an attack to destroy eternity drew near, the planet sang. A gigantic amount of mana gushed forth at Enkidu's feet and moved to swallow Enuma Elish head-on. Don't hold back. Those words were not directed at the heroic spirit he was facing. As the King of Heroes spoke to Ea, so too did Enkidu speak to the massive amount of mana engulfing the void cracks in space. He spoke directly to the planet. I am a weapon. Wield me as you wish. Instantly, enough mana surged forth to make the earlier flow seem like a mere trickle. Several times more mana geysered from the Earth's surface, becoming a cyclone of energy enveloping Enkidu's body. Then, the energy became a titanic lance of light to pierce the heaven and earth, with the heroic spirit as its core. It was a concept that once propagated life. It was the fiery coals that had been used to overcome mankind's first fears. It had walked alongside mankind through hell, and now it sang of paradise. The separation of heaven and earth was of little consequence. From past to the future, from future to eternity, it would link the land and seas to the heavens. Terror was etched in the karmic endeavor of life. Thus, with time, humanity would rewrite it down to its genes. Both a weapon and a tool, a mud doll without form. Walking among humans, it, who had acquired the joy of friendship, shouted. As this world was already hell, humanity would create paradise on its own, comprehend the beginning. Enuma Elish, O humanity, bind thy gods. Whilst destruction had loosed upon the earth, a mighty strike hurtled toward the sky. Enkidu, the chisel of the gods, stitched the sundered world anew as it drove a straight line at its target, meeting the world-tearing sword of rupture in a violent clash. And then, in a dream. What's that? In bed, Kuraoka Tsubaki opened her eyes as if she felt something like the ground shaking. With sleepy eyes, she turned toward the window, but everything seemed the same as usual. As soon as she thought that, a brief flash lighted up the far-off sky, and soon after that she heard a dull noise that seemed to tear at the atmosphere. Thunder! A chill ran down the girl's back and she rolled up into a ball. She pulled the covers over herself and began trembling. I'm sorry. It wasn't clear who she was apologizing to. The young girl continued mumbling words of apology with each peal of thunder. She was used to being the subject of magical experiments by her parents from an early age. She didn't fear the spirits that bore her no ill will. Or the spirit, rather. Yet it seemed she was terrified of natural phenomena such as thunder and earthquakes. Thunder is so scary. At that, the darkness in the back of the room stirred, and gently encircled the bed, shielding the girl from the light and sound. Then the darkness divided into a second darkness and slipped through a crack in the window, exiting the house. It was a world within a dream. There were no signs of people. Tsubaki's parents were lying neatly up on the bed, sleeping like the dead. The fragment of the darkness, the pale rider, used its own energy to ride the north wind blowing towards the south of the town. This strange realm was a pseudo-world created by linking Tsubaki's magical energy and dreams to the foundation of the Holy Grail War embedded in the land of Snowfield. It was something approaching the incarnated mental worlds called reality marbles by Magi, but as a space born of the convergence of many conditions such as the mana-rich land and Tsubaki's innate skills, it obviously could not persist without limit. The surroundings of the world were limited to the Snowfield region that was the foundation of the Holy Grail War, and the world was bound by many rules, but Tsubaki, who had unconsciously manifested the phenomenon, had no way of knowing that. Her only wish was to spend happy days with her beloved family. As long as her master wished it, the Pale Rider would only use its powers to make Tsubaki's wish come true. It had no emotions, nor did it desire the Holy Grail. It only functioned as an indifferent system to fulfill its master's wishes, like a Holy Grail whose functions were greatly restricted. Nor did Tsubaki have an outrageous wish to make of the Holy Grail. If she did, it would be to keep living as she did into old age. In this regard, her team could be considered the victors of the Holy Grail War. The Pale Rider silently continued to protect her. It acted to rid Tsubaki of her troubles. For example, thunder and lightning had appeared in the dream world, so the Pale Rider was wriggling its way into the real world to dispel this distortion in reality. The Pale Rider had no emotion, just as humanity's fear of disease would never die. Therefore, it had no concept of destruction. Therefore, it had no fear. It didn't matter that the obstacles were so powerful. It could well be the trials described in the Book of Revelations. Reality, desert region. Power and power. Noble phantasm and noble phantasm. Divinity and weaponry. When these two extremes crashed into each other, the spatial distortion blasted the surroundings asunder. In the interstice between the attacks, an immense struggle of energies commenced. In the past, the sacred prostitute watched the heroes clash from the ancient city of Uruk, speaking these words in a daze. I feel as if the world was born 7 times and destroyed 7 times. In the midst of such swirling power, the two heroic spirits never ceased smiling. It was not as if they could spare a moment to laugh. If either one let his guard down for even a moment, his body would be rendered unto oblivion. Both of them knew that. Nonetheless, it was but a trivial matter. To these two, this was mere child's play, a childish contest of wits. Still, neither could afford to restrain himself nor give the other any ground. They only wanted to compare their powers. They wanted to struggle and bash fist against fist. That they were technically enemies in the Holy Grail War was little more than happenstance. It was simply the fastest way for each to feel for himself that his friend was there. Their friendly battle just happened to involve everything around them. Besides, the energies of the two noble phantasms cancelled each other out and dispersed into the surroundings, though this dispersion left tornadoes that ripped and tore their way into the surrounding landscape. I'm relieved. As the winds howled, the two descended to the ground and Gilgamesh finally spoke. I was puzzled by the remarkably nostalgic form you've taken, but it seems you haven't regressed on the inside. Somehow, Enkidu appeared to have taken on the form that he had when the two first met for the first time. Enkidu's original form was that of a shapeless mud doll, so he'd probably taken many shapes over time. The King of Heroes was haughty to the end, but he still spoke with an attitude clearly different from the one he showed to others. Still, to come all the way out to the desert to receive me, you're a selfish one as always. Only you would be foolish enough to prioritize your concern for a forest over welcoming me. He had not actually expected Enkidu to come and greet him and spoke with casual sarcasm. Dreary land that this is. Even I notice sandworms and rats. Have you fully matured that you can distinguish between lives? His words were pointed, but there was no hint of hostility. While the avatar of arrogance criticized his friend's selfishness, Enkidu shook his head, replying, I don't have the right. As a tool, how I ought to be depends on the will of my master. But I do make the final judgment. It's better if I'm the only one the desert resents. Gilgamesh sighed with exasperation. Are you going on about that again? You haven't changed even in death. Meanwhile, you've been reborn as a living tyrant. The retort to Gilgamesh, who had been called the wise king in his youth, was equally sarcastic, but it too contained no animosity. Indeed, if my childhood self knew of my current state, I dare say he'd commit suicide. Gilgamesh spoke so casually compared to the time when he manifested in that cave that one might wonder if he was a different person. If the Magi knew that his usual attitude saw this now, they would probably be wondering why the androgynous heroic spirit hadn't killed him yet. The reasons were many, but there was one objective factor in particular that a skeptical Magus would probably accept, though the reason actually didn't even register in Gilgamesh's mind. Even for the King of Heroes, the opponent could not be easily killed. Such was the strength of this heroic spirit. Anyone who observed their clash would agree. And the fight still wasn't over. Still in Gilgamesh's hand, Ea's blade once again began rotating, and the space between Gilgamesh began lighting up as if in response. Is that so? That's... In your youth, if you're the boy... Okay, wait, what? No. Who's saying this? I'm trying to figure out who's saying this. Okay, he's talking about... I think this is... Enkidu. Is that so? In your youth, if you were the boy that Shamhat described, I think you would have chosen to live. Not for the future, but for the citizens of Uruk who were still alive in that moment. Countless tentacles stirred from the sand as if they were part of Enkidu's body. In response, Gilgamesh again used his noble phantasm to float into the sky. There his treasury, the king's treasury, Gate of Babylon, appeared in the space behind him, and dozens, then hundreds of noble phantasms emerged. Simultaneously, the ends of Enkidu's earth tentacles transformed into countless different weapons, from spears to bows and swords. One breath later, over 1,000 projectiles thundered into each other. The cacophony of clashing metal rang out over the windy battlefield. Only two heroic spirits stood there. Still, the clash between the two heroic spirits, each an army unto itself, was so violent it could only be called a battlefield. The collected noble phantasms of the most ancient heroes, said to be the prototypes of all noble phantasms, were innumerable. Weapons that would be the ultimate trump card of ordinary heroic spirits were hurled forth without reserve. To counter this, Enkidu became one with the earth and transformed the body given him by the gods and created countless divine weapons. It was a furious, inexhaustible exchange of ultimate attacks, and the paradoxical scene illustrated how well matched their friendship was. The conversation had been cut short again, but neither was upset by this. It was enough for them to be here together in this place. Whether it was a match of wits through words or a fight to draw blood, all were worthwhile conversation to both of them. This was all the more why Gilgamesh found it unforgivable that someone would dare to throw cold water in their joyous reunion after thousands of years. A chill wind blew behind Enkidu. While coming to control countless weapons of sand, he looked to the north. It's coming. Oh. Sensing that it was no bluff, Gilgamesh also turned his attention northward, but he could feel nothing. It was probably because Enkidu possessed the highest level of presence detection that he was able to pick up on this subtle presence. Originally, neither Gilgamesh nor Enkidu would have paid such a feeble aura any mind. In fact, they had completely ignored the familiars spread out across the area. But this was different. It was far fainter than the birds and insects that served as familiars. A strangely weak presence. Enkidu instinctively felt a bizarre pressure from the aura. Something terrible is coming. It's probably the sort that's my natural enemy. Gilgamesh raised his eyebrows at that. Enkidu had no weakness. Gilgamesh knew this fact well. If there was one exception, it would be the death that hounded him. Ruin itself, none other than the curse of death the gods had placed upon him. I see. I lost myself in our celebration. I'd completely forgotten that there are thieves about who intend to lay hands on my grail, my treasure. Do I count as one of those thieves? You don't need the likes of the Holy Grail, do you? You yourself are capable of becoming a flawed wishing machine. At Gilgamesh's strange offhand remark, Enkidu replied, I can only imitate it at best. Well, my wish had already been granted anyway, and it's not as if my master desires the Holy Grail. Casually speaking of forfeiting the war, Enkidu focused an intense gaze northward while he kept talking. But I'm obligated to protect my master. I can't disappear because of some interference here. I'm going to run away for now, but let's continue this another time. As Enkidu said run away with a smile, Gilgamesh frowned. What sort of mongrel... That's kind of funny. That's kind of funny because a mongrel can be used to describe a dog, too. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. I don't mind that, right? That's pretty good. Okay. What sort of mongrel is your master that you would go to such lengths? If it is of such worth, let me judge it myself. If it bored him, he would end the master right there. Such was the implication of Gilgamesh's words, but Enkidu shook his head, chuckling. No way. You only know how to judge gods, humans, and wine, right? Gilgamesh's face was full of question marks, though he wasn't actually that interested in Enkidu's master. He let out an unkingly sigh and said, In that case, let us continue the party after I execute the insurgents. Raising his head, Gilgamesh's eyes contained quiet rage as the curs who dared to interrupt him. At them, rather. While continuing to shoot down the torrent of noble phantasms with his tentacles as if nothing had changed, Enkidu tried to soothe the irritated king. You can't do that, Gil. A king isn't supposed to make a gloomy face like that. When a king worries his subjects, it upsets them more than the fear the tyrant would. You're lecturing me on the way of kings right after deciding to turn tail. 1,000 transformations you might have, but you really haven't changed. With a broad grin, Gil raised Ea again. In response, noble phantasms scattered about the area roared. Ea, strengthened by the power of the noble phantasms, twisted the world once more. This will be my final blow tonight. Accept this in place of a contract for our reunion. Of course. Enkidu fused with the earth again and spoke gathering power in his body. I'll run away right after that. Though I feel bad for Ea, using it as a smokescreen. Don't jest. Is not all of creation blinded by my power? Then the two smiled again, and in the next instant, with even greater power than before, the two Enuma Elish, the two creation epics, met and left their marks on the world. The sight left scars on the desert land, and in the hearts of most of the watching magi that time would find difficult to heal. Several minutes. I need a drink. This is a long chapter. Thank you, milk tea, in the Genshin Impact glass that I got another one of because they keep giving them to me. Several minutes later, the raging tornadoes had delayed it greatly, but the fragment of the Pale Rider finally arrived in the middle of the desert. But everyone was already gone. and there was no spatial distortion to be found. For a while, it rode the wind and circled the area, and the Pale Rider allowed that body to dissipate from the world. It would not pursue the heroic spirits that had disappeared. After all, it had come to eliminate the sound of thunder that had frightened Tsubaki, and those sounds were now gone. There was no need to do anything else. All traces of the heroic spirits were finally gone from the desert, and it returned to silence. The bodies of some bird familiars that grazed the Pale Rider as it moved lay comatose on the desert floor. The moonlight illuminated the land as it always had. Hence, the first battle of the False Holy Grail War drew to a close. Assassin, who had felt the enormous powers, hardened her hostility and her caution, while the Bloodsucker was wide-eyed at the strength of the King of Heroes and his opponent. "Incredible, beyond all expectation! Is this not the power to violate my servant?" he muttered in admiration. The Magi in the city reacted in various ways. Some who sensed the danger fled, while others embraced their ambitions now that they had witnessed the miracle of heroic spirits and began forming schemes to keep their rights as masters from being stolen. The epicenter of the fierce clash between magical energies was observed in the far-off country. It was noted in the Clock Tower, headquarters of the Magic Association. No one had died this time, but both the Magic Association and the Holy Church, who had planned to quietly observe the ritual, revised their plans. The flow of mana had been outside of their jurisdiction. This conflict could no longer be ignored. An unspeakable war between Magi had ignited in the land of Snowfield. In light of this, the genuine and spurious were no longer concepts that mattered. Prologue 7. Visitor and, I'm gonna guess, Saber. So the question is, how much more is left? Because we're on page 127. If it's short, I might just finish it. Oh, well, 129. Let's go to file. Just gonna go to the last page and see how much it is. 172, that's a long one. Okay, sounds good. Right? Because that last chapter is gonna be a long one. Alright, sounds good, guys. We'll be moving on to the last chapter. That's a long one, actually, come to look of it. Okay. Sounds good, guys. We'll be moving on to the last chapter, Prologue 7, Visitor, and, next time, as we finish up Fate's Strange Fake Volume 1. I'll see you guys then. Ciao.